France is never going to sanction India, never going to say we will no longer sell you spare parts because we disagree with your policy on this or that, or because a domestic voting constituency in France doesn't like the Indian government. That's not going to happen. In the United States, of course, it happens all the time. There's strong pressure, for example, in the US to discontinue the defense relationship with Saudi Arabia over the war in Yemen. Now, it didn't happen, but the pressure was very strong, especially during the Biden years. The US has cut off other countries. The US cut off Pakistan for that matter, despite the fact that Pakistan is recognized as a major non-NATO ally, thus, in theory, giving it access to the best US technology. The US for many years cut off Pakistan from supplies from spare parts for its F-16s. Now that's been restored, but the issue was terrorism and Pakistan's support for international terrorism. Iran is still trying to fly F-15s from the 1970s that it can't keep airworthy because the U.S. obviously is not going to sell defense equipment to Iran. So, the idea that there would be a long-term reliance on a country as flaky as the United States, not as flaky as Donald Trump, the current president, but as flaky as the United States is just a non-starter in India.
When we're talking about political perceptions, Salvatore, what do you know of how Indians see how Trump has been berating his closest allies or not being seen to be supporting them in whatever they think is important? I mean, do they come away thinking worse thoughts about America today as opposed to their more traditional
Mhm.
doubts about America? Is there
Oh, yeah.
something fundamentally different about how India sees America today as opposed to, say, the Biden administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration? What is that difference? I really want to get to the nub of
Oh,
this.
the Hindu internet has now come to see the United States, not just Donald Trump, but the United States in general, is thoroughly anti-Hindu, full of anti-Hindu discrimination. They view the restrictions on H-1B visas for Indian tech workers has been perceived to be a nativist, anti-India, anti-Hindu, racist move. There's been just an awful lot of that language coming out by mostly reputable people, not ideologues on either extreme in Indian politics, but a broad sense among Hindu Indians that the U.S. is now against them. They were wary about the Biden administration, but in the wake of, and I think largely cautiously or guardedly optimistic when Donald Trump was elected, but now they've come to view Donald Trump as stoking nativist, right-wing, anti-Hindu feelings in America. And I get asked about this all the time, to which I have to tell Indians I don't live in the U.S. anymore. I view the U.S. from abroad, but that said, I don't think there's any deep-seated, rural cotton belt racist anti-Hinduism in the United States. But nonetheless, many Hindus believe that. Strangely, at a time when the Trump administration has done much to reach out to Hindu American voters, not to Indian Hindus, but to Hindu American voters. And quietly, for example, there was a major controversy over the BAPS Akshardham in Robbinsville, New Jersey. The Biden administration had raided the temple, had started a civil rights investigation into what they perceived as use of slave labor at the temple for the religious workers who were carving the figures, and all that was dropped by the Trump administration. So a big but quiet win for Hindu Americans at a time when in India, Hindu Indians have become convinced that the U.S. is more racist than ever.
Well, that's interesting because, again, I look at it from a different perspective. I look at the United States and I start to slowly see a sort of latent multiculturalism stepping forward, even in the elite circles. I mean, you've got J.D. Vance, whose wife is Indian.
Yeah,
You had one of the presidential contenders who was Ramaswamy.
yeah.
These things may. How do they play out in India? Was
Well,
there a
Kamala
sort of
Harris, I mean,
well,
herself,
okay, well,
vice president.
she's a
Yes.
mixer. She may not resonate as well. But again, when you see people that have ties, blood ties back to India in the American political elite, does that fill India with any degree of confidence that things are moving up for them because they have reach into the White House, because people aren't seeing Hindus or Indians as scary? I don't know.
Yeah, not particularly, because Hindu Americans and Indian Americans in general. But here, first I should explain: in the diaspora, Hindu Indians tend to overwhelmingly identify as Indian in the diaspora, whereas Muslim Indians in the diaspora tend to overwhelmingly identify as Muslim. That is, they cohabit, socialize with, join organizations that are not primarily Indian organizations, but are primarily Muslim organizations. So the success of Hindu Americans in the United States has come with a degree of, yeah, yeah, I don't want to say Schadenfreude. It's not that. It's uh, a sense that the people who have made it in America are people who've turned their backs on India. That is, it's striking that many successful Indian American politicians and corporate leaders know relatively little about India and have no particular connections to India, don't do much to try to um, help promote better U.S.-India relations. And that's because the U.S. is a very absorbing culture. I mean, German Americans fought against Germany in two world wars without any issue being raised about, no, we can't. Italian Americans, my own uncles, great uncles, fought against fascist Italy, despite the fact that, their parents had emigrated from Italy. America is an absorbing culture that, Hindu Americans are not Indian. They're Hindu.
Yeah.
They're absolutely Hindu, but they've really lost connection with India. And in Indian Hindu online circles, uh, that's often seen that the ignorance about India of Hindu Americans is often highlighted in their online discourses.
Turning on to more practical matters, matters regarding energy. Um, Ukrainian military strikes against Russian refineries have clearly undermined Russia's ability to supply oil to India. However, as I noted earlier, we had our recent guest on, Ravi Shankar, who told us that India could easily switch suppliers.
Yeah.
India imports about 40% of its oil from the Gulf and around 37% from Russia. Do you agree that replacing Russian supply will be simple, or is that too optimistic, especially now that Moscow has banned oil exports until 2026?
Yeah, he's right. It's not an issue at all. India has been taking advantage of low-cost Russian oil simply because it was legal under
Right.
UN sanctions. I mean, and I should stress to viewers, India has been complying with the US-sponsored anti-Russia sanctions. Those sanctions were designed to lower the maximum price that Russia could obtain for its oil overseas, and that oil is on the international market. And
Yeah.
India, like China, has simply been buying it up. There's no real risk for India's energy security because, unknown to much of the world, India's number one export is refined petroleum.
Mm.
India is a major refining center for petroleum that then goes back to the Persian Gulf, but more of it goes to Southeast Asia. So tankers arrive in India with this Russian oil, it gets refined, and then it's re-exported as refined petroleum products. If that export industry is hurt to some extent by a reduction in, or by an increase in the average price of the oil that it purchases, well, that's a commercial issue. They've been making hay for 2 years, and now they're going to go back to normal business operations. But there's no issue for India's own domestic energy supply because India is a massive refined petroleum exporter. So any reduction would simply be a reduction in India's exports, not a reduction in oil supply to the Indian economy.
So basically, what we're seeing at the moment will not cause Indian citizens to freak out because of rising petrol prices or inflation. That's not on the cards, right?
Look, there could be some very minor oil price inflation and energy price inflation in India, but it would not be a major issue. Most of that Russian oil was going out for re-export, and it was a big boost to India's petroleum exporting industry to have that cheap supply of oil. What will happen is there will be a decline in gross Indian exports. So the Indian economy will take a little hit, but put in the context of India's economic growth, it's really just not a major issue. I'm not a stock market speculator. There will be individual Indian corporates that are severely affected by no longer being able to buy cheap Russian oil. But from an economic standpoint, the broad economy will hardly feel it.
If we go into the balance of power as far as India is concerned on the world stage, Salvatore, is India the smallest of the contemporary great powers or the largest of the middle powers?
Depends what you mean by great power. I would say there are really only three, maybe four great, quote unquote, great powers in the world. Because when I say great powers, I mean countries that have the wherewithal and the intention to project power beyond their borders. The United States does, obviously. The United Kingdom does. France does. Russia has, but is now, with the war in Ukraine, no longer really able to play a global role. That's three and a half. China's another half. China has the uh, developing capacity, but still is very limited. I mean, China has lots of military kit. What it doesn't have is things like refueling tanker, air-to-air refueling tankers, fleet support vessels, the sorts of things. China's aircraft carriers, for example, just routinely run up and down and up and down the Chinese
Mm,
coastline. We haven't heard anything about Chinese aircraft carriers, off the coast of Australia. Now, there were
yep.
some, China's beginning, there was a Chinese naval exercise in the Tasman Sea, but it was very small scale from what I understand. So let's call China half a great power, Russia half a great power, then maybe there are four, five great powers. India, although it has the wherewithal to project power, it has never done so and has strong policy settings against doing so and shows no signs of any interest in projecting power. I've actually just started to see the very first ripples in India of people talking about, to be a great country and a great civilization like the United States, like China, India also has to have overseas bases.
Mm,
And the question is, overseas bases where? For what purpose? What is India going to do in Africa or Southeast Asia or the Middle East? It's not clear. Some, again, highly nationalistic commentators in India have just this year, and I've only seen it in 2025, just this year begun calling for India to have global power projection capabilities. But there's no sign that the government is interested in that. There's no sign that voters are interested in that.